YouTube, it's Firewalker, and boys, it's great to be back. This past month of November has been absolutely insane, and this past month alone I've managed to survive my very first birthday without my parents and my very first Thanksgiving without my parents, which is arguably a more family-oriented holiday than even Christmas. It's a really big deal here in the States, but it wasn't too bad. I managed to survive both of those with minimal emotional breakdowns and maybe one existential crisis. Not bad. And then on top of that, I had 2 weeks of mandatory overtime. But I'm back and so glad to be back to give you guys this video on Basic Buddhism 101 as requested by one of my viewers, the Fifth Lord Silence. I was really glad to be able to work on this project, even though I'm about to just give you guys the basic rundown. I'm really excited about this project, not only because it was requested by one of you, and so I'm happy and excited to be able to fulfill that request, but also because I've always thought Buddhism was pretty fascinating. So it's really cool for me to have an extra motivator to look more into it and learn more about it, and I was definitely not disappointed. For this, I read a book published by the Oxford Press called A Very Short Introduction to Buddhism, and it's part of a series that this publisher has put out on a bunch of different topics that is extremely thorough and well researched. Actually, there are a couple of books in the series that were assigned to me in one of my pre-law classes to do for a book report. So I feel pretty confident in this source. So let's go ahead and get started into Buddhism 101.
Let's go ahead and jump into the basics of the history of Buddhism. Buddhism was founded around the year 410 BCE, so there's been a lot of history. But the main things you need to know about it would be that the term Buddhism came to be in the 1830s, that Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism, and it came to be in either Nepal or India, depending on who you ask, because the founder, Siddhartha Gautama, was born in modern-day Nepal, but his enlightenment occurred in India. Siddhartha Gautama, who is later known as the Buddha, is said to have been of noble birth. Some say he was even royalty before he saw how much suffering there was in the world and more or less left to find himself. He's also said to have performed miracles during his life, as well as miracles occurring during his birth, enlightenment, and death. Lastly, the two main holy books for Buddhism are the Dharma and the Vinaya. Assuming I'm saying that right. Actually, you might be better off if you just assume that I'm not. The philosophy of Buddhism can get extremely complicated, especially when you take into account how many different sects of Buddhism there are. But if we were to sum up the basic philosophy, we'd use the Four Noble Truths. The first of which is life is pain. Anyone who says otherwise is selling something. Brownie points if you can name that movie. Second, suffering is caused by desire or craving. Third, there is an end to suffering. And lastly, that there is a path to the end of suffering, i.e. there's a way to get there. I also came across this beautiful quote in response to the idea that Buddhism is pessimistic. It says, "The only way to end suffering is by fulfilling the human potential for goodness and happiness," which is definitely a lovely thought. One of the fundamental things that needs to be understood when you move forward discussing the philosophy of Buddhism is that everything cycles. The universe and everything in it goes through cycles of evolution and decline, lasting billions of years each, which would be an eon. And this is where the idea of reincarnation comes in, because our lives will cycle several times each eon. Now, when a person is reincarnated, there are actually 6 realms and 31 levels of reincarnation. Which realm and level you'll be reborn into is determined by your karma, which is a sort of spiritual currency. And your karma is made up of the good and bad things you do throughout your life. The interesting thing about karma is that it's seen as a natural law like gravity, rather than a morality determined and kept up by a supreme deity. When I say that there are 6 realms of reincarnation, this is typically depicted by the Buddhist Wheel of Life, which you can see here. Let's start with demons, which would be in hell, which is the lowest realm of reincarnation. Then comes animals, next ghosts, which are hungry spirits whose desires cannot be fulfilled. Picture the crew of the Black Pearl from Pirates of the Caribbean here. Fourth in line are titans, demonic, warlike beings that have a thirst for power and cannot find fulfillment. Next up is the human realm. The human realm is often thought to be the most advantageous because it's pretty far up the ladder, but you're not so far up you can easily become disillusioned and forget you're trying to reach nirvana. Lastly comes gods. Gods exist as simply a higher form of being in heaven, which is likewise simply a higher plane of existence. Heaven is not the end goal, and you don't have a permanent place in heaven as a god or in hell as a demon, because you're merely there for a span of time relative to your karma, and then you'll move on to another realm. The ultimate goal is to reach nirvana by escaping this cycle of reincarnation, which we'll discuss a little bit more later. Some of the interesting things I came across while reading about Buddhism is that while Buddhists believe in spiritual beings and spiritual realms, basic Buddhism does not depict a creator god. It's fascinating that they had, back in 410 BCE, the idea of the universe existing for billions of years through cycles of evolution and decline, where the universe will essentially be reborn without a deity causing it to do so. And I thought that was worth mentioning. To be fair, though, reincarnation was not original to Buddhism and was actually widespread in the region before Buddhism and especially before Christianity swept through. You would think, with all the talk of spiritual beings and spiritual realms, that Buddhism would teach that we have souls. But there's actually no mention of a soul in the original Dharma or teachings of the Buddha. Somehow our essence or being is reincarnated without the need of a soul. And lastly, I hadn't really considered the role of monks in relation to the rest of the religion, so it was interesting to discover that monks do not have an intermediary role between humans and other realms or nirvana. The most interesting thing I discovered in the comparison is that Buddhism does not seem to have the same negative, self-defeating, self-depreciating, abusive beliefs as Christianity. It doesn't seem to focus on human inadequacy like Christianity does. For instance, Buddhism values progress and enlightenment as a process spanning several eons, in contrast to the emphasis on redemption that is central to Christianity. Redemption is more like a light switch, and you're kind of expected to get your shit together after that. In Buddhism, you're just trying to be a little better, to make the world a little bit of a better place, and then you'll improve some more in your next life. Also, in Buddhism, humans are a part of the environment, whereas in Christianity, humans are distinctive from the environment as its caretakers. I've already mentioned that Buddhists see time as cyclic, which is a rather stark contrast to the linear view of time seen by Christians. Buddhism focuses on the universe as a whole. It's a big picture religion, whereas Christianity is and always has been geocentered. Out of all of creation, Earth and its inhabitants are pretty much the whole point. Humans are just a part of the puzzle in Buddhism, no more important than the rest of the universe. And Christianity is, of course, centered on human life. In Christianity, humans are the ultimate creation, made in the image of God himself, and it's all about us. There's also a big difference in the viewpoints on the cause of suffering. In Buddhism, suffering is caused by desire. In Christianity, it's caused by disobedience, which seems an inherently more guilt-ridden idea. Most notably, though, is the fact that heaven and hell are not end destinations in Buddhism. Instead, your time in either of these realms is relative to the good or bad things you've done, so the severity of the punishment better fits the severity of the crimes. This seems almost infinitely more just than Christianity, where you cannot learn from or correct yourself after hell. And now to answer some basic questions. You've heard me say Nirvana several times throughout this presentation. I was told in school when I was learning about this that Nirvana is essentially the Buddhist idea of heaven, but this really isn't a fair comparison, seeing as they believe heaven is temporary and it isn't the end goal. So what is Nirvana? Well, we don't really know. The Buddha actually discouraged theorizing about Nirvana or seeking to know what it is because he viewed it as irrelevant. But it seems like a pretty relevant question to me. Rather important, even. There's currently some disagreement as to whether Nirvana is simply another state of being or whether it is to cease being. If you were to ask each school of Buddhism what Nirvana is, you would probably get a different answer every time. So if you've heard anything about it, I would be interested to know what you've heard. The biggest question I've always had about Buddhism is, why can't we remember our past lives? What's the point of learning lessons in this life if I'm just going to forget them? The book had a couple of interesting ideas about why this might be if Buddhism is true. Perhaps we are simply conditioned to not remember our past lives. Perhaps the memories are simply repressed by the process of reincarnation. Or maybe we do actually remember these lives, but simply don't recognize the memories as memories and just dismiss them. Actually, though, there have reportedly been an increasing number of people claiming they can remember their other lives, and some of these stories seem more sound than others. It's an interesting thought, though I'm far from convinced. How would you go about proving this anyways? I've heard it said that Buddhism teaches that all desires are wrong, but this is not the case. There are two Sanskrit words used in Buddhist teachings to describe desire. The first means harmful or excessive desire, with roots in greed, hate, and ignorance, while the second means positive desire, such as the desire to reach nirvana or the desire to help others. It is only the negative desires that would be detrimental to your reaching nirvana. So there you have a very short overview of Buddhism as requested by one of my viewers. I know this isn't the typical video that I do, but I wanted to thank you for the request and for encouraging me to look more into this fascinating religion. If anyone would like me to do a video expounding upon some of the ideas in Buddhism like karma, nirvana, etc., and they get pretty complicated and some of the ideas can seem pretty wacky, please do let me know. Always be sure to comment, rate, share, subscribe, etc., and let me know, would you like me to do more videos like this? Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys next time.